Lynette's going to talk about two cases that are relevant to our conversation tonight. So Lynette, would you mind sharing those two cases for us?
Sure. Can you hear me? Do you want me to put this up? Or not? Is that better?
Yes.
So rather than go chronologically, let me start with talking about a little bit about the Alquist case, which I refer to as the Cranston School Prayer case, because the points I want to make kind of tie into what was just being said about Debbie's case. This case was brought in, I think, 2011, decided in 2012. But think about this. Cranston West High School was built in like around the late 1950s, and the auditorium was finished in, I think, 1960 or 62, and maybe it was 63. But one of the senior classes donated the school prayer and the school creed, which had been recited year after year and sometimes daily after they were adopted. And before that, it had been the Lord's Prayer. And this stayed up on the wall right through this whole case. And nobody batted an eyelash or an eye about it until it was pointed out to Jessica, and she says, wait a minute, I'm an atheist and this offends me. I mean, and you know, that's really what, in many respects, the ACLU is about, is preserving the rights of the minority when the majority orthodoxy, whatever that is basically saying, what's your problem? Why do you feel a need to rock the boat? You know, and don't see, you know, in whatever community you're in, that people in the minority that don't share your views or are very religious but a different religious belief or set of beliefs are made to feel ostracized and not part of the community. So throughout all of those years, you would have thought that somebody would have noticed this and said, oh, we can't do that. In fact, they switched to the school prayer, which I think Roger Williams would have rolled over in his grave 10 times, because not only was it contrary to his philosophy that government should not be espousing religious orthodoxy, but it was such a crappy prayer. I mean, it was so banal. It had no lofty, you know, it's like, thanks for, you know, I mean, I can read it to you, but it was just so embedded in what was going on in the school environment that it was really a very pedestrian prayer, and it was designed to overcome the Supreme Court decisions that had been recently issued back in the late 50s and early 60s that said you can't have a daily prayer in school, a government-sponsored prayer. So they started, you know, so they stopped doing that, and they came up with this banal thing, and they stopped doing the prayers over the public address system every day, and then just slapped it up on the wall, where it stayed for however many years it was until I think they cut it out. We were just talking about that in 2012 after the court ruled in Jessica's favor in the case. But the fact that it was up this entire time, and as we discovered as we were preparing the litigation for it, which went very swiftly because everyone was trying to, the lawyers at least, were trying to be very cooperative in terms of getting to the facts, we discovered that in addition to this school prayer, this banal prayer at the high school, there was a very Our Heavenly Father prayer at Hugh B. Vane Middle School for at least as longer. And to the extent that you can read the cases that we argued, the Weisman case, and then there's the case involving the flip version, which is having the Ten Commandments on the grounds of a public courthouse, but on the grounds as opposed to in the building, which went the other way in the Supreme Court. That, you know, I mean, at one level you can talk about all these very lofty principles and how that makes a difference, but to me the bottom line was school-age kids are different. You know, that we assume that if you're going onto the grounds and you're an adult, and there's a case that came out after ours from the Supreme Court that said it was okay to have the benediction at the school committee meeting that was attended by adults, but did not, you know, disavow the Weisman case, which is about middle school. And here, Hugh B. Bang was the same age, and not only they had this in their auditorium, and a very clearly religious prayer, not this leached out prayer that was at Cranston West, but also every Memorial Day they had this great event to honor the fallen servant people who had gone to that school in the past, but it was always started, and it was attended by all the students, and it was opened with the with the invocation. I get my terms wrong. So
no, you're right.
Invocation and close with a benediction. And let me just tell you, before I came to Rhode Island, I don't think I'd ever been in a church. And I go to more Catholic church events than temple at any time. So I'm getting, it's coming in by osmosis. But it just struck me, that, they just didn't get it. And of course, when it came to the issue of the prayer on the wall, it became an event, really theater, at the school committee meetings, which were attended by a whole bunch of very angry constituents who, unlike the committee members who tried to explain that this was not religious, it was not sectarian, it was not this, it was not that, they knew damn well what it was. It was, it was honoring their, because it's, it was honoring their religious beliefs. I think it started in Heavenly Father.
Our Heavenly Father, yeah.
Yes, which is very much, in the Christian tradition. It's not a mistake. And they pegged it right. They were right to peg it that way. They were, I think, incorrect in their view that it should be in the public school. But they were very adamant about it and swayed a very close vote. I think it was 4-3. But, these were folks who get elected. And so we had to bring it into court, and it was tried in front of Judge Laguerre, who, after hearing all the arguments and receiving a lot of documentation, ruled in our favor, and Cranston decided, again correctly, but it was not without its moments, that they were not going to appeal it, and they took it down. And we're still wondering where it is, because as Don and I were saying, it would have been a fabulous teaching moment to put it someplace else, or they could even do it with, with copies or pictures, but to have it in a museum or someplace where you could actually talk about the religious traditions and the traditions that go all the way back to Roger Williams, in the context that he was, how we all swear in court to hold, to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. He would never have done that, because that is basically debasing his religious beliefs and making it something that becomes like government orthodoxy. And and you would think that that Rhode Island, of all places, would get that, but we go through, it's different religious views. I mean, how many Puritans are left? Are there any? Is there anyone?
Well, the Congregationists draw their heritage
Okay.
from the Puritans. They don't always like to admit that,
Yeah.
but that's their heritage.
But but whatever was religious orthodoxy at various times, the worm turns, and now we're all looking at this from the standpoint of. Let me move on to the other case that I was asked to talk about, which is the Spratt case, which was litigated. Initially, it was brought by this inmate who is probably still in jail, pro se, convicted of murder. He's not going anywhere. And while incarcerated, he started attending religious services and became a lay preacher, and then actually got his universal life minister recognition, which is not much, but he really fervently believes in preaching along with the chaplain. It probably gave a lot more meaning to being in jail for him, and hopefully in terms of interacting with other people in jail. And he did that for 7 years. And then there was a change of wardens in his prison, and the new warden said, you can't do this anymore. And so he sued, and after he lost, or during the part of the, I think it was after he had lost before the magistrate, the ACLU volunteered to assist him, and we wound up taking it up on appeal to the First Circuit. And what we were arguing was that the religious land use and I get it, it's RLUIPA, Religious Land Use and Incarcerated Persons Act, I believe, is what the acronym is. But that and the RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, were two acts passed by a very interesting confluence of members of Congress, the religious right and the ACLU left, wanting to restore what over the years the Supreme Court in a bunch of decisions had basically removed so much of the protections of the First Amendment free exercise clause for in land use, saying that, well, if it's equally if it's a neutral provision that equally applies, but it just happens to prevent this church from building here or worshiping there, as long as it's a reasonable measure and it's neutral, that's okay. And for incarcerated people, again, reasonable measures, no longer this really strong, what we call strict scrutiny, requirement that the government, if it's going to interfere with your ability to exercise your religion, has to have compelling reasons and has to develop it in the least restrictive way they can. So these two statutes were passed by Congress and basically restored that earlier version in those circumstances. And there again, we have these provisions are now being used much more than when they were first passed. It was a lot of churches finding that they were just getting zoned out of things. But now it can be a lot of mosques that are being told, you can't build here. Right. At any given time it could be a different group that finds that they are being denied equal rights with the majority view, whatever the majority view is or whatever's orthodox at the time. So that case, we were able to convince the First Circuit that the district court hadn't given it a fair look and had not. They just accepted really unsupported statements by the department that we need to stop him from preaching for institutional security. We had a thin record, but a good record, because they didn't put anything in to support that, and we had him preaching for 7 years without incident. And so it's like, why now? What's different? And I mean, of course, if he'd been preaching violence or some kind of religious viewpoint that would, involve racism or, hate crimes or something, I'm sure they could have engaged in certain restrictions because of genuine institutional concerns. But this was just, you know what, we don't want you preaching anyway. And so we were able to use that effectively, and when it was returned to the district court, we settled it, and they adopted new regulations that permitted him to preach. And really, we weren't doing anything, unique, because the Federal Bureau of Prisons already allowed exactly what he had been doing. So, one of the things that the ACLU
has stood for, you know, and it goes back, it goes way back, but you know, just to think about the Skokie case, you can remember that one where the Nazis wanted to march in a suburb of Chicago that was heavily populated by Jews. That you just can't, you know, pick the ones that are consistent with your personal viewpoints, because when you do that, sooner or later, your viewpoint gets, you know, and the other folks lose. Eventually, all those bad decisions come, and your viewpoints are not able to withstand the majority view either. So those two cases were both successful, and I think that they still stand up. I was looking back through some of my earlier cases. I know we did one involving the deductibility of school books for sectarian schools, and you know, and that one we won it, but it was overturned, basically overturned by a later case by the U.S. Supreme Court. I certainly am concerned by where the court is going and what Congress may do. But I think that the one good thing that they have in terms of Congress is that I don't think that, you know, that there's much stomach to try to undo our LUPA or the RFRA, because, you know, there's always the concern that if you start rolling those things back, that it might come back not only on the mosques, but also on the local church that some unit of government decides they don't want, you know, to be built there.
Thank you, Lynette. Let me share, before I ask Rabbi Matt to say something, I just want to tell you two quick stories about Kristen West. Kristen West case. First of all, I spent 6 of the best years of my life at Kristen West High School. It was a junior senior high in those days, so unless you start counting, I mean, I'm not the brightest bulb on the block, but I was able to graduate at that time. But I entered Kristen West in the fall of 1960 and graduated in 1966, so I was there when all of this happened. I testified at every opportunity in front of the school department about this, and it really jarred their preserves that someone who was actually there, a student there, was speaking against having this on the wall. I will tell you, it's made for some interesting class reunions. Well, we've had a chance to talk about things that never made it to the news that helps some people understand things. And one of the things that Lynette and I were talking about, twice I offered to the school committee in public to gather faith leaders in the city of Cranston and to use this as a learning opportunity for students to talk about the history of religious freedom in this country, and particularly in our state, and to have a conversation about what does religious freedom mean today, especially in an increasingly pluralistic religious society. The school committee was not interested in having any sort of learning experience come out of this. They just wanted to do that. I just want to share one other story with you about that, though. Rabbi Lynette Labinger, who was Sarah's predecessor as the president of the Board of Rabbis, at that time was the rabbi for a synagogue that was at that point located in Cranston, and subsequently moved to East Greenwich, which some members of East Greenwich tried to stop because of zoning, but I was in East Greenwich at that time and we bought that, so that's how Amy and I got to really be good friends. But she went to members of her synagogue and said, you all grew up in Cranston. You sat there in that auditorium. Didn't that ever bother you? And they said, of course it bothered us. And so she said, well, why didn't you do something? And they said, look at what's happening to Jessica Alquist. Do you think any of us wanted to go through that? I don't think so. And so, and that's one of the things I share with my fellow classmates all the time. Because they said, nobody ever objected. And I said, just because they didn't object doesn't mean they weren't offended or weren't bothered by this. So I think those are important things to mention. I should say that Megan worked really hard, and I know this for an absolute fact, to try and get a representative from the Muslim community here tonight. It's just that the some really great spokespeople that we have in Rhode Island from the Muslim community are otherwise occupied tonight. Otherwise, somebody would be here. So I just want you to know they worked really hard to do that, and I know that that's an absolute fact. But before we kind of open up to a couple of other topics, I'm just wondering, Rabbi Mack, if you got some thoughts or things that you want to share about what we've talked about so far?
Well, sure. And I worked with Rabbi Gutterman for many years, the better part of my career. So I know that this was.
Oh yeah, that was Channel 10. Yeah, one of them. They printed our address so we could get hate mail.
Oh.
Yeah, one of them did that. I was just thinking something else that went on with them, but I've lost it. What it was.
If you think of it, and you probably will once we get 2 minutes past, right? Just let it just jump in. Are there other questions before we go on to a couple other topics just to touch base? Yes, sir.
Wondering if you know of instances where the Supreme Court decision in this case is still not being respected, where in communities, I assume particularly in the Deep South as well as in the Midwest. That's
I was on the faculty at Rick. My dean's wife was a superintendent in New Jersey and bragged that they weren't going to enforce the decision. And it was in my face. You're not going to make us do what we don't want to do. Jersey. So I would imagine probably more places than not.
We got a lot of letters from people with that exact experience saying that they all, just as you were saying, they were always uncomfortable with it. They were always, didn't understand what was happening, but didn't have any way to go about doing anything about it. And they had our case to bring to the school and say, U.S. Supreme Court says, here it is. And they were mostly ignored, but I think they felt like they had a way to at least try. Oh yeah, all over the place. Football games, the coaches gather them for prayers all over.
Yes, sir.
I have a question about, as being Jewish, which is generally a minority, you describe Catholic audiences and Baptist. Was there ever what was the interaction like between these different Christian groups with you? Was there ever was it just a block, or did they have competition or disagreement between themselves?
Why don't you answer what your experience was, and I'll be glad to respond to that.
Coming from Brooklyn and New York and growing up in a Jewish enclave in Brooklyn, I knew not a whole lot about the various Christians groups. And I learned when I got here that there's a very rich tradition, particularly among Catholics, of having been discriminated against and having a sense of tolerance. And I did run into that here. The people I work with and students and all could disagree, but respect that you were taking a position. So I didn't feel that I could particularly identify a group that was different from others among the non-Jewish community. Did you?
Yeah, so I would just share with that on a national basis. There's only one group in Washington, D.C. that's a religious group that only deals with religious liberty, and that's the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty. And for years, for decades, they've stood on behalf of separation of church and state. That's all that they do. And so even within the Baptist community, because I get that those buses were all Baptist buses. I mean, you should understand that in the United States, many people who claim to be Baptist do not follow Baptist principles as introduced to this country by Roger Williams. Okay, so you have to really kind of know your Baptist groups. I mean, some people divide and conquer. We just divide to divide. So there's more Baptist groups in this country than you can shake a stick at. It's not our proudest thing to brag about, right? But the historic Baptist tradition sees this differently, and a number of other religious traditions see this differently as well. I don't know how well that was represented 25 years ago in Rhode Island. My sense is that my community that probably should have been standing up more with the Weismans. I'm glad we stood up with Jessica, and I would have wished that maybe we would have stood up a little more 25 years ago, but I know that there have historically always been people within the Christian community who see this as an important issue. But there's a lot of others who just, it's what they really believe, and they believe it so fervently that they just, I mean, unfortunately, Debbie, the experience you had with that young man coming up and talking to you, I mean, that still happens today all the time. And that grieves me, because that's done in the name of a faith that, to me, is absolutely critical in my life, right? But the fact that that would happen in that way is really unfortunate.
Are you an American Baptist?
I'm an American Baptist, yes, sir. That does make a
I
difference.
was too, for many years, and I remember going to a Southern Baptist church one time, and I was almost considered Lutheran. So there was quite a difference between the different rungs of Baptists.
Yeah, we all of us who are in religious traditions talk about our brothers and sisters in our own traditions that think we're infidels. That just that cuts across. That's one thing we all share in common. I saw another hand over here. Yes.
This was addressed a little bit by Dan when you mentioned that due to your tenure, you had some security in your job, which is bringing up the case, and Vivian also addressed this as a lot of people don't have that sort of protection and security. What are some concrete ways that people can find that security, or that we can offer security to people so that they can speak out against civil liberties violations or ethics violations?
Someone on the panel like to handle it?
Different hat, having a union. But unions as a waning institution are the best protection workers could have under any circumstances, including freedom to express yourself. But that's a whole area of discussion we don't have here. I guess you need to create communities that aren't going to let that happen, aren't going to let retribution happen, possibly by standing up together and finding strength among themselves. So you have to fire everybody. Maybe we're seeing some of that in the reaction around the country to Trump, and people who never got involved politically are getting involved. We may be seeing some of that, but it's hard. There's a reason that people are intimidated, because they're right. There will be difficult retribution. What can they do? Look for strength in numbers and try to change the game forward. But it's tough. Maybe getting help from the political system, but that's a stretch. So yeah, maybe also the reprofessionalization of the media might be another one.
Well, let me just say that